Perhaps I should start off to say that I was born on the 4th of July 1925, which is about 7 years after the end of World War I. As I was growing up, the people were still had the World War I fresh in their minds and were grieving and building memorials all over the place. Every little town had their own memorial. As far as my family was concerned, my mother's two brothers went to the war, and one of them returned and the other one didn't. So my Uncle Arthur died somewhere in France. We don't know where he was buried. It didn't mean all that much to me, personally, because I never ever met those people and so on. So as far as my life was concerned, when I was 6 months old, my mother walked out of the house and went to live with somebody else. And so the family broke up. And I don't know what the cause of the actual cause of the breakup was, but I need to tell the story of my father, I suppose. He was doing very well. He had his own business. He was a carter. He owned one of the very first T-model Ford lorries. He used the lorry for carting. He'd go down to pick up a load of oranges or something along the river and cart them for somewhere. And then pick up a load of fish to go back the other way and so on. So he was fairly prosperous. But they decided to move to Adelaide. And I guess it was for business reasons. And he was buying a house in Edwardstown, and that's where I was born. The money that Mum was given by Dad to pay for the mortgage and things like that, she was going into town with her friends and spending on booze and everything else. She walked out and he found out what was going on. He lost everything. He lost the lorry because he was so much in debt. He lost the house because the mortgage hadn't been paid, and the whole family broke up. Went all sorts of directions. The first memory I have is I was living with my mother again, and with a bloke called Jack Burns, who she was living with at that time. And we were very, very poor. We had very, very little. They were the days that it was very common for people to shift very often. I've lived in so many streets in the West End of Adelaide. My earliest memory, it was moving house in the middle of the night, midnight, pouring rain, and my brother's wheeling me in a handcart through the streets. I don't know what age I was, but I was very, very young. And it was common in those days for people to do the midnight flit. They would rent a house, pay a fortnight's rent, and then not play an event afterwards until it got to the point where the bailiffs were ready to come and kick them out. And that was happening to us as a family. I was still just a toddler, and there was a child born after me, and there was a whooping cough epidemic around Adelaide at that time, and This baby, Johnny was his name, got whooping cough, and he was taken off to the Northfield Infectious Diseases Hospital. It used to be called the isolation box in those days, but unfortunately he died there. And my mother didn't want me to be carted off to this isolation box because of that. So when they came to check whether I was okay, so on, she hid me under the bed in the bedroom so that they didn't see me. We lived in a place that was opposite a orange juice making factory. I used to stand at the door of this factory, and I could look in and see them all working in there, and I stood there hoping that one of them would think, well, perhaps we can give you an orange or something, but they never ever did. Also, I remember when I was very small that my older brother and sister take me down to Grove Street, to Goodger Street, near the Central Market. There used to be a cake shop there, and they sent me into the cake shop and said, ask them if they got any broken biscuits and stale cakes they want to give away, right? Because at home we would never ever see a biscuit or cake or anything like that. A lot of the time we were on the dole, and in those days it wasn't called the dole, it was called the rations. You'd get a voucher that 2 shillings and 6pence to last you a fortnight for groceries, and another voucher to buy a bit of meat. This is all welfare. With the meat voucher that we had, I took it around, Mum sent me around to Sturt Street Butcher, Turner's I think was the name of the place at the time, for some lamb chops. And when I went round to the butcher to buy the lamb chops, and I handed over the voucher, and the butcher said, you don't get chops on the voucher. You can have sausages or sausage meat, but that's it. You've heard of dripping, animal fat. Well, in those days, if you wanted to cook something that required oil, you would use dripping. We would have that as kids, spread onto a piece of bread and a bit of salt. And particularly, when you cook something with the dripping, you would pour the fat that was left over into a dish, and you used the same dish all the time, and the juices would settle at the bottom of the dish. And if you got a piece of bread and you could dig into the bottom of the jar, and you're spreading these juices on your bread. I did that very often. I did like fish and chips. There was a place called fish and chip shop in Compton Street, in the West End, just off Goodger Street. But one of the things they had there that we managed on very rare occasions, they also sold roasted rabbits. I think it cost about 2 shillings or something for a roasted rabbit. And so 2 shillings was a fortune. But when I did start school, the first school I ever went to was Sturt Street. And shortly after I'd started school in Sturt Street was when the family decided, for whatever reason, that I was going to go to Kapunda. So they took me down to the Adelaide railway station, put me on the train, told the guard to put me off when I got to Kapunda. And when I got there was two men waiting for me to arrive. And I found out that one was my eldest brother, who was 15 years older than me, and my father, and it was in Kapunda. And that's the first memory I have of ever seeing my father, actually, when I was 5 years old. And I was in Kapunda for about 5 years, or 4 to 5 years. My father at that time was working in the Kapunda Institute as the caretaker. But we lived in, there was a row of 3 miners' cottages, because you know Kapunda was a great copper mine place. But there was this row of 3 miners' cottages, just 3 rooms. The one that he was in was the best of the 3 because it had a stove and so on. There was no electric lights, it was just candles and kerosene lamps. After my father was sacked from the job at the Institute because somebody else prepared to do the job for 10 bob or 10 shillings a week less than what he was getting paid. And so we moved further along in this row of cottages to the very last one, which was a very primitive one. There's no running water, no electricity, of course, and candles and kerosene lamps there. The toilet was a hole dug in the backyard, and your bathroom was out under the stars in the sun, just a hand basin. I've never had anything like a shower or a bath or whatever. It was all stand up with a wash brush and to wash out in the open. That sort of things never actually worried me. I just accepted them, well, that's what we've got, that's what we have to put up with. And I was quite happy living there. Of course, I had a lot of freedom. I was great friends with the sons of one of the local publicans, and the North Kapunda Hotel as a playground. The Kapunda at that time was a very central town for farmers, and people kept sheep and cattle, and there's a lot of big sale yards there. They had a horse auction as a part of the grounds of the hotel, where they parade the horses around in a circle for people to buy. We had that as a playground when it wasn't being used. We had the mines that were not being used. We had that as a playground. Well, one of the things in Kapunda too was a pastime I had. There was a dam. It was only 1 minute's walk from where we were living in these cottages, and it was full of yabbies. So we used to go down and catch the yabbies in nets. I can remember the first day that I started school, I was kitted out by my father with a new shirt, new trousers, new shoes, and that all of these clothing bought, and the shorts were too long, come past my knee, and the blouse was very, very loose, because they said, you'll grow into it. And there was one lad there in the school, Radloff, a fairly big lad, and he was teasing me about my clothes, that the shorts were so long and so forth. So I got stuck into him. And although he was bigger than me, I'm a bit fiercer, a bit of more of a street fighter, and I beat this lad. And strangely enough, from then on, we were good mates. Reached about grade 5 in Kapunda Primary School, and then it was decided for some reason, the same as when I went up there, they decided you're going back to Adelaide now, right? So I came back to Adelaide to live with my mother again in the west end of Adelaide. Before school, I arranged for myself with a newsagent selling newspapers on West Terrace and Sturt Street in the morning, selling the Advertiser, and then after school selling the news, because that time we had 2 newspapers in Adelaide, the Advertiser and the News, and I was earning a bit of pocket money by doing this. Nothing very much. I think about 2 shillings a week is what I earned. We used to go to the movies on Saturday afternoon matinees, of course. This is when I was living in the West End, and there was a picture theatre called the Empire. It was in Grote Street. It doesn't exist there anymore. It was eventually turned into a departmental store, and it was a regular Saturday afternoon. I think it was. It cost 6pence or something to get in. I managed to get that. We used to call that theatre the Bugs. Well, I don't know, I've never stuck any bugs in there, but that was his, everybody talked about that. You never talked about going to the Empire Theatre, you were talking about going to the Bugs. A decision was made that you were going to live at Mitcham with your brother. I had an older brother who was 10 years older than me. He was married, and wife was very nervous because he was working on shift work, and they wanted somebody who could stay with her while he was working the shift work. So I then shifted to Mitcham. My living conditions changed very dramatically because I had my own room all to myself for the first time in my life. It was fairly sparse. I had a bed, I had a wardrobe, I had a dressing table. I never had anything like that before in my life. And again, it was one of the situations where nobody seemed to care where I went or when I went or how I went. So I had lots of freedom. I had Brown Hill Creek as a playground, and I was going to Mitcham School. The school assemblies in those days, where the assembly would recite each morning before they started classes. I love my country, the British Empire. I salute your flag, the Union Jack. So we weren't really Australians, we were just members of the British Empire, and England was regarded as the mother country. I can remember going down Alberto Creek, and when the olive trees were in fruit, we used to go down and pick the fruit, and there was a bloke there in Mitcham would buy a can of fruit off us for 2 shillings. Oh, that was a fortune to get 2 shillings. Education wasn't something that was very high on the list of priorities. In the family, survival was more important than education in those days. And when I was 13, I'd reached grade 7 and would have been moving on to high school, only high school. My brother, as a sort of self-appointed guardian, applied to the education department to have me permission to leave school, because the leaving age at that time was 14 years. But the education department knocked it back. We refused to allow that. I had to continue until I reached 14. So I went to the only high school for 6 months. And the day that I turned 14, I was out of school and looking for a job. The next door neighbour in Mitcham was the manager of a menswear store in Victoria Square. Roy Morris was the name of the store at the time, and I got a job as a messenger, riding a pushbike around Adelaide. Took the orders for making suits and so on. I would take the material to a wholesale tailor who would make up the thing. I had to buy a bike to take the job, because I had to provide my own bike for going around to do the messages. What I did there was, I'd sweep the floor, and once a week they had a jar of floor, I think, and it needed to be oiled. I used to have to spread this oil over the floor for the store, clean the windows, and go around with racks of suits, ready-made suits, and brush them off the dust and off the shoulders and all that sort of thing. But I was in that job then for 3 years, until I was 17. I started off at 5 shillings a week, right, and 2 shillings and 6pence of that I had to give to my brother to pay board. But for 6pence I could go to the movies in the afternoon at the Star Theatre there at Unley Road. So as far as I was concerned, I was getting rich. And on my 15th birthday, I got an increase of 2 and 6, so I was getting 7 shillings and 6pence when I turned 15. When the war started, you obviously would have heard of the Dad's Army that was on television. Well, here in throughout other places in Australia, they had a Dad's Army Navy. I volunteered and joined up for that. And all the yachties and boat owners like Port Adelaide Sailing Club and the Outer Harbour Yachting Club were this Dad's Army. And I learnt to be a signaller in this Dad's Army. And through that organisation, I had a mate called Chappie Charlesworth, you know, Charlesworth Nuts that you hear of now. Well, it was his father that started that business, and we were both learning to become signallers in that organisation. But every weekend I would go down to Port Adelaide and we'd spend the weekend down on the Port River. We used to hop in a dinghy and row from the Port Adelaide Sailing Club down to Torrens Island, and we would stay overnight on Torrens Island. We'd pull the dinghy up on the shore, and I've caught rabbits on Torrens Island. I've caught garfish and all sorts of things on those weekends. That was every weekend I was spent with this Chappie Charlesworth, myself, down there. And but with this Dad's Army organisation, I remember they had an exercise. The Russians were coming across, had landed on the coast around Henley and places like that, and were advancing across the peninsula, and we were there in the Port River putting soldiers on the shore to stem the stem this invasion that was coming, so on and so forth, you know. But you know, they taught it real seriously at that point of time. Immediately I turned 70, I put my name down to join the Navy, and but I wasn't mobilised until October of 42. Now, at that stage, the Japs were in New Guinea and were not far from the shores of Australia at that point in time. I wanted to get into the Navy, and I think it was a sort of feeling of patriotism at the time, actually, that motivated me. I had to get my father's permission, of course. I had to get a clearance by police to join the Navy in those days. I had policemen call around and ask me all sorts of questions. And the only other member of my family, my brother, was 4 years older than me. He was, first of all, went into the militia because the compulsory enlistment in the militia, you get called up. Once he got into the militia, he decided, well, he might as well join the AIF, and so he joined the AIF. But we were the only two of the family that actually saw service during the war.